Hello, Lesley.
Hi.
Hi. It's so lovely to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Lesley, what a treat to meet you. You have been volunteering for the MND Association for 20 years, I've heard, which is an astonishing thing. And it is such a treat for me to get to meet you, as a patron of the MND Association, to say such a huge thank you and to as a way of celebrating Global MND Awareness Day and all the work that yourself and so many volunteers do. But I was wondering how it started for you. How did you start working with the MND Association?
I was an occupational therapist working for the NHS, and I was working in end-of-life care. And I was always really impressed at how the MND Association supported us with the patients that we treated. And I just felt I wanted to give a bit back, really. And I just felt the role of the volunteer would enhance my role as an OT, and that my OT role could feed into my role as a volunteer as well. So that's how I started. It doesn't seem like 20 years, and I feel I'm sitting here today representing all the volunteers that the MND Association have got, because they're such a fantastic association at supporting us as well once we are volunteering. I think historically volunteers aren't an easy bunch to manage, but I think because of the training and the support that we get from the association, I think they do keep their volunteers. Yeah.
And can I ask also, because am I right in thinking you volunteer in different capacities? Could you tell me about the different aspects of the association that you sort of help with, I suppose?
Well, I started off as an association visitor. So we had people living with MND that were identified to us by the area coordinators. In the early days, it could be support, sort of emotional support, and we used to be quite practical. There were people I used to visit that I used to help feed, or I used to push out in a wheelchair. That's changed somewhat now. And then I had a bereavement myself, and I stepped back from volunteering. And then it was suggested that perhaps I help on the Helpline, the Connect Helpline. So I've been doing that now for about 10 years, I think. So I do both now, and I just feel it's not a lot of time. It's a couple of evenings a month for the Helpline. The association visitor, I'm supporting 3 people at the moment, but that might be monthly, it might be weekly, it varies.
And can you tell me a bit about the helpline? So what does that involve?
We log on at 7 o'clock in the evening. The line is closed, I think, from 5 till 7. The day staff go off at 5. We come on at 7, and then we're on till 10:30. We log on we can use our own mobiles or our own landlines. Numbers are anonymous when they phone through, so we can't call people back. And it varies as to who you get phoning. The very first call I took, in fact, was from America. I learned a lot from him, actually, about what facilities were over there. But the night calls can be very different. I mean, more recently, obviously, with the raised awareness, we do get calls off people who probably wouldn't have been aware of MND a few years ago, but now are identifying that perhaps they've got symptoms and they're quite concerned. And because the diagnosis process is so lengthy, they're waiting for test results, and they just need somebody to talk to, really, on the phone, and somebody to listen, or somebody to signpost again. Or we can refer to the office staff the following day. If we feel that we can't address what they're phoning about, we can then get the office staff the following day to address that. I had a phone call once off a guy who was very concerned about his father's breathing, and obviously that's an emergency situation, so it's directing them to whether they've got anybody to contact, any medical support, and so it can be a variety of different calls at night.
I suppose one of the things I was curious about, I've been working with the Motor Neuron Disease Association for about 10 years now, since I've made the Theory of Everything, which is what introduced me to MND and the community, You've been working with the M&D Association for 20 years. How would you say things have changed as far as the disease, the awareness, and I suppose the support in that time?
Well, I think awareness obviously has changed. I mean, it's on the news constantly with Rob Burrow and Kevin Sinfield and yourself and the film. So I think the awareness it's much, people have heard about it now, and it's not just end of life either now. It's, you know, I've got friends who are still working who, you know, people are referred to rehabilitation services now, not just end of life services. I think the research side of it obviously is really important, and I just feel that probably having an army of volunteers like myself, we help mitigate some of the costs that go to the support, although there are still a lot of costs that go to support, so that can be freed up for the research, which, you know, that's what we're all striving for, a world without M&D.
One of the things that I was also curious about was individual people. It's such an intimate job you do with people at such a vulnerable moment in their lives, and the families coping with so much. I imagine you've met extraordinary people over the years and families, and I wondered if there are anyone specifically that you hold fond memories of, or that you're working with now.
I think they're all extraordinary. I mean, I don't know what it is about MND, but people who are living with MND seem so resilient. And I think as an occupational therapist, it was quite a rewarding role, because, you know, there's such a lot you can do with technology now, and maintaining independence. And probably things that I was going into 20 years ago, like there was one lady I used to remember, and I used to spend an hour with her just adjusting her pillow because she was uncomfortable. And, you know, I went to her funeral, and even at her funeral, there was this joke amongst the relatives that whoever visited her spent the whole time adjusting her pillows. You know, and technology now, you know, hopefully that could be addressed, and she wasn't just having to wait for that hour that we went. I had a gentleman ring me recently on the Helpline, and he'd just been diagnosed. He was, I think he was probably about 50, got young children. And he just talked to me for probably about half an hour about how he felt, how he was going to tell the children. And then he thanked me and said he was sure I'd got something better to do in the evening than listen to him. And that stayed with me, really. I mean, you know, to think that he was thinking about me when it was all about him, really, and what he was going through and the journey that he was having to, you know, travel.
It's extraordinary. There's it's an astonishing thing to, and a privilege, I suppose, to bear witness to people with and families with such courage. I met a man called Glenn Phillips when I was preparing to do Theory of Everything. I went to the Queen's Square Neurology Clinic and spent time meeting, was introduced to families, and there were many extraordinary people that I met, but I will never forget Glenn, who was he was sort of academic in film, and he just had such a vibrancy to him, and a kind and an overwhelming courage at a moment. But when you're volunteering and speaking to people and families who, as you say, can be so resilient and strong, but is there a cost to you when you come home? Like how do you look after yourself, I suppose?
I think I find it harder now that I've retired. Obviously, when I was at work, although you didn't speak about people because of confidentiality, you've got the support from a team. Now that I've retired, it's probably more difficult. But there's about 12 or 14 of us who work on the Helpline, and I think it's the Helpline probably that's more difficult, because you can finish a shift at 10:30 at night and there's nobody to talk to, really. Yeah. We do have a reflection sheet, and if I find that I've had a really difficult call, I will write down my thoughts on that. And we can always phone the Connect support staff the following day. Up until COVID, we were meeting regularly, and we all know each other quite well. We've got a WhatsApp that we use for operational stuff if we need to swap a shift or we're having technical issues and we can't get onto the phone. Obviously, we don't exchange details about people that we've spoken to, but we know that we've got a phone number there if we did need somebody to speak to about something.
Gosh, it's so amazing hearing also what you were saying about the changes and shifts in technologies, certainly even since I've been working with the M&D Association. But I remember when I was spending time with Stephen Hawking and his family, he had one technology for communicating that involved, he had his glasses with a sensor on his glasses, and it was just the alphabet and this cursor going across the alphabet, and whenever he moved this eye, it would stop on one letter, and it took so long for him to communicate things. But Dell were working with him, creating a new technology that would stay ahead of the disease, and I found that idea of, from my experience of people living with motor neuron disease, because time is such a complicated thing, you're always having to stay ahead of the disease. And it's interesting now that technology, one of the great things about furthering technology and investment in that is those things that can be useful. But what's complicated, I saw with that, is you get used to your one way of doing something and then you've got to relearn another new technique.
I think an example of that is voice banking, isn't it? There was no voice banking, a few years ago, and people that I've visited and supported, they'll have voice messages on a phone that they don't want to get rid of, but the voice banking has brought a whole new perspective to all that. When that person's not around anymore, they've still got the voice.
Yeah, I know. It is so lovely to meet you.
Oh, well, it's lovely for me to meet you as well.
No, I don't know about that. But it's a real honour, and 20 years working with this brilliant association and with extraordinary people living in extraordinary circumstances. It's a really admirable and astonishing thing, and bravo on it.
Well, thank you. I feel I'm representing all of us though today. I'm just the lucky one that was chosen to talk to you. And
talk to me. I mean,
I think we need to thank you as well, because you do such a lot for the M&D Association. I did a bit of background reading, and I think it's amazing what you've done as well. So I think we should be thanking you as well.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I remember it's so much, interestingly for me, about awareness, and I agree with you that has shifted and changed. Certainly, I remember just after Theory of Everything, there was also the ice bucket challenge moment, and there was, but it's about retaining that awareness, because I think for you and me, it feels like that was only yesterday, but actually the years do move on. But the things that it's about the understanding of the disease. I found it extraordinary that during COVID, people with motor neuron disease weren't on the most highly vulnerable list and didn't have access. And it was extraordinary. We got onto a parliamentary call on Zoom, and I just couldn't believe that they weren't understanding that this was a disease that can shift within days, weeks, and so. But all of that felt about education, and it was for me when I was prepping to play Stephen Hawking. But the more we can do to make people aware of what the reality of motor neuron disease is, I feel like is a good thing. But it's people like yourself, and as you say, all the other volunteers doing such amazing things for the M&D Association that are making lives easier for people living with M&D. Such a treat chatting with you, and thank you for everything.
Well, thank you as well. Thank you.
Speak to you soon.
Yeah, okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.